Thanks for tuning in to Season 4 of Strange, Rare, and Peculiar Homeopathy Podcast, where homeopathy lives, breathes, and evolves with Denise Straiges and Alastair Gray. We'll be exploring modern practice, research, and philosophy, from Hahnemann's radical insights to today's breakthroughs and discoveries. Get ready for homeopathy woes, feedback from pros, and the more you knows.
Hi there, folks. Welcome, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on wherever you are. My name is Alastair Gray, I'm the Academic Director at the Academy of Homeopathy Education and also the Research Director at the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. Who are you?
I'm Denise. I'm Denise Straiges, and I am the President and Clinical Director of AHE and of the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy, which, by the way, is a not-for-profit dedicated solely to advancing homeopathy. We are an advocacy group. We're a 501c3, and we are raising money for scholarships to make homeopathy education affordable. We provide affordable clinical services, and we curate an incredible research library. And we've got this research office that Al runs, and that means that we're keeping track of every single case that comes across our desks. Anyway, we have great plan for you today. We're going to talk about case analysis. Yeah, I think this is a really good topic.
I've been looking forward to this. Irrespective of that topic. I get to sit down and you and I get to talk about all sorts of things. Not that we don't talk and we're face to face in other areas of our lives, but I've been looking forward to this one a lot. I should also mention that Denise and I have moved into a brand new phase in our relationship.
What's that?
So, you know how you do the dishes and it's like, oh God, I gotta do the dishes. But here's the thing. Now I run to the dishes because what Denise does is she sits there on the stool and what are you reading me?
I'm reading aloud to you. We're reading Moby Dick. And I'll tell you what, I've never read it before. You read it, haven't you?
I've read it. Oh, it must have been, I'd say 3 times, kind of, like you try and work your way through the classics.
Mm-hmm.
And I must admit, I read it and went, oh, that's a nice story. But listening to, oh my God, the prose is incredible.
Prose is unbelievable. It's so good. We used to do this reading aloud thing 10 years ago. We did it for a while, and we got to the point where I was reading you Harry Potter in Italian.
That was kind of hot.
Which was fun. Anyway, but that's not why we're here today. So we are here. We're going to talk about case analysis. Amazing. But before we get started, we just have a couple of announcements. And then at the end, we've got some listener comments and questions. So the announcement, we have the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. We have an auction. It's a virtual auction, and it's now live. And there are some amazing things in there and some really great deals. There are kits and lots of things that have been donated by people in the homeopathy community. I'm really excited about the Lessons in Pure Homeopathy books by Lippy. Those are amazing. Andre Sain, it's his life's work. They're 2 books. They're each about, 3 inches thick. And that's in there. There's remedy organizers, a veterinary homeopathy course. All these things have been donated by members of the community. And here's the thing, every bid supports the Homeopathy Help Now Care Grant Program. And so this is how individuals and families access really high quality homeopathy care when financial hardship would otherwise make it impossible. And we're down to just a couple of hundreds of dollars left in the coffers. And we have been able to provide, I want to say it was like $50,000 in subsidized care last year, something like that. Yeah. So, I mean, we do our best. We got to keep the lights on. So anything, this is a way that people don't have to just send a check. Although if you want to send a check, we will not say no, but you get something really amazing in return. And so
smash the like and subscribe button and send us a check while you're at it.
Yeah, and like and subscribe. We're really getting amazing traction on this podcast, and we're so excited that people are interested in really learning about homeopathy, what it isn't. And I guess, and this is part of our advocacy mission is, unfortunately, this beautiful modality that has 230 years of clinical evidence behind it during which time there was no evidence of harm, we are now seeing that people are harmed by the misuse of the medicines. Right. And so I just think we have to be careful. And so talking about what homeopathy really is, I mean, we are really glad that there are people who care about that, and if you love the way that you or somebody else uses homeopathic medicines off script, you do you. We're not condemning. We're also not condoning, but don't call it homeopathy, because if somebody gets hurt, I don't think that Hahnemann's medicine needs to suffer because of it. Anywho, so let's talk about one of the ways that we can sort of engage with the process of doing homeopathy, and that is in how we analyze a case.
So I want to start.
You start.
So isn't it amazing that for 230 years,
Yeah,
and all of the books and the publications, like you've got, looks like maybe a couple of hundred books behind you here. There's, I don't know, how many have you got? A couple of thousand books in this office?
oh my gosh, we have 120 linear feet of antiquarian books.
Yeah.
And then and we have probably 4 times, that's a quarter of the library. So whatever that is.
Why is that, with all of the years and all of the substance, there is no real case analysis textbook? When you think about it, yeah. Why is that? It's funny because there's case taking advice, there's all sorts of advice in different components of the process that homeopaths go through, especially focusing on materia medica, especially on the beginning, the entry point, the case taking, but not on the clinical decision making, not on the reason or the reasons that this totality is selected, and ultimately this is the result of that, because the remedy is the result of something. You know what I'm saying? So there's a whole lot that goes on, and a whole lot that is not talked about. And I think that's so exciting, because what are you doing this summer? Huh?
So I've been working on a book, a textbook, a tome, a compendium of case analysis since I think 2019. So 7 years. I mean, and I put it aside when I was doing my graduate studies, but yeah. And so I'm so into it. I love summer because every morning I get, I don't know, anywhere from 3 to 5 hours to work on research. Yeah. And I'm dividing my mornings just for the geeks out there, for the research geeks, anybody who just loves this more than anything. So the half of it is doing the research that I'm working on, the intellectual history of homeopathy, combined with, it sort of intersects with germ theory, biomedicine, autoimmunity, and the complex cases that we deal with today, like PANS and PANSAs, degenerative neurological conditions, GI, all of that. So I had those as discrete subjects for a long time. I had like separate notebooks for my study. And I realized that once I got to a certain point in the research, it's all of a piece, which is so exciting. Anyway.
What does that mean? That's not an expression.
It's like all part of the same. It's all part of the same thing. It's all interconnected. But I'm only allowing myself a couple of hours of that because I've got to get this finished, this case analysis book. And it's been really fun because, like at AHE, we teach about 500 chronic clinic hours a year, plus hundreds of hours of follow-ups, plus the acute care, all that. So I feel like I'm teaching clinical process constantly.
Yeah.
And I've been amassing this information for, gosh, I probably started to keep the practical notes maybe 15, 16 years ago. Probably. Wow. What's that?
No, wow. That's a wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I asked last summer, I got students to send clinical gems, because I hear sometimes the students will talk about, or the graduates, they're working on a case, and I think it was Kaylee who came up with this, the Denise in your pocket. So I'm putting all that together. And so I've been really steeped in kind of the conversation about how we analyze a case, because there isn't an understanding or agreement about how one gets from the sick person in the chair to the delivery of the medicine. And there are so many ways in between. Like one of the things I'm working on now, I've got like thousands of pages of notes on this. And I've got the outline. And as I'm working on the outline and looking at, for example, what are all the ways that a person can analyze a case? It's not like there are 5 ways to analyze a case, because there are different interpolative frameworks that have come about. But there are also different totalities to assess. There are different levels of the analysis that might be appropriate at any given time. You might prescribe on a smaller totality in lieu of seeing the larger totality. Like all of these things come into play. And so it occurs to me also that the lack of sort of publication on this is also, well, there's no shortage of publication on do it my way. And so, right. And so I think what has also happened is that there's always been like a guru kind of thing in contemporary or modern homeopathy, where methodology, like remember during the 90s, 90s, early 2000s with Sankaran and the sensation method became like a craze. It became a craze, right? There were schools that took that on and stopped teaching the foundational basics of homeopathy, skipping over all the things to go to what basically, and I don't say this in a derogatory way, was kind of a 2-dimensional analytical framework. Because for those not familiar with it, so it was quite interesting back in, I didn't look at the date ahead of time. It was in the 90s when Rajan Sankaran, a prolific, and is he 2nd or 3rd generation homeopath? 2nd, right?
2nd, I think. Spirit of Homeopathy is 1991.
Okay.
So that was the first book.
And then The Soul of Homeopathy.
The Soul of Remedies is later. The next one was the Substance. It's really interesting. I used to know this because I would teach the natural classification of disease.
The Substance of Homeopathy, yeah.
Substance, yeah. And then that was a year later. Basically, he pumped out a textbook a year or 2.
And then comes Insight into Plants. And it was quite interesting. And so as we look at the analytical framework for case analysis, I guess that's redundant, but as we look at the framework for case analysis, right? So I love when there are great thinkers, like someone like Rajan has this running through his veins, right? And so he was sort of colliding with this idea of what Hahnemann was working from, right? Hahnemann's working toward the universal theory that homeopathy turns out to be, and it's based on the map of nature. And so what Rajan Sankaran did with the Insight into Plants was he had this great idea. Now, of course, I'm simplifying this, but that plants in their particular families will share similar sensations. And he had to, in order to make this idea work, he had to look at how you would parse these different sensations out. And so he assigned to them, I'm using air quotes here, a miasmatic nomenclature, which is different than, in some ways, than Hahnemann's miasmatic nomenclature, but he needed to flesh out his system. And so people went crazy for it, right? Which I have a couple of cases that I never would have gotten to had he not started to ask these questions about how these things go together. I don't know if I ever told you about this case. It was a Stellingia case. A woman, this is going back like early 2000s. This woman had horrible pain in her back. She was wearing a morphine patch. It was really bad. And anyway, I got to it through the Sankaran methodology, and she had an incredible healing response. Now, I could look at that and I could say, when Jeremy published the syphilis book, had that been out then, I probably would have gotten there as well. But at the end of the day, you get ideas from these great thinkers and the way that they are giving advice on how to analyze a case. But it's not going to be complete, because not every case, this is part of the problem, right? So plants have a lot of sensation to them. It's different in the mineral kingdom. It's different in the animal kingdom. You start getting into the animal kingdom, next thing you know, you're at the zoo. When in reality, if you start looking at a snake or a spider, a venomous creature, you're better off in the path lab asking whether or not it's cardiotoxic or neurotoxic, right? So the systems sometimes fall apart, but the ideas I think are pretty sound,
That is
right?
one distant cat.
She is so persistent. Yeah. If those of you, if you're not watching on video, Hildegard of Bingen, who is our podcast cat, she just wants to be on my lap. But the problem is then she starts typing. And it's just, it's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. She's not good with the spelling. I like it. What occurred to me a number of years back was that I believe Hahnemann did a pretty good job of filling out the principles and guiding the listener really well on similars, on single remedies, on
Yeah.
minute dose. And when it came to it, I thought to myself, I don't know if he's done such a great job on totality. And so I remember reading this article by a friend of mine in Sydney, Ken Duran. And Ken wrote an article about the totality of symptoms of the person versus the totality of characteristic symptoms of the diseased person.
Yeah.
And I read it and I went, click, boom, like, and I've been in practice for a decade.
Oh,
and,
wow.
and it just made so much sense. And I realized that the difference between the way that James Compton Burnett would have analyzed the case and ultimately prescribed, and
Right.
the difference between him and Kent or Hughes and Skinner or Cooper, who was the other one, John Henry Clark,
Yep.
all of these guys back then, was because they interpreted totality differently given a set of facts.
Right. And it comes down to, and this is the thing, and this is part of what in getting this book all together, it's like, oh my gosh, there are so many different pieces. Because you could look at the American homeopaths versus the British homeopaths, and you get sort of all the, because it's not even geographic, but let's say the Kentian homeopaths,
Yeah.
and then you get the anti-Kents like Hughes, right? And then you get Burnett. And so each person is going to look at a case through his own lens. Like Burnett, for example, he's a master anatomist. So therefore, he is going to see everything through his framework, which is every disease has a seat, right? And so there are people that are building their practice from a very Burnett standpoint, but we've talked about this before on the podcast. There are plenty of mistakes that get made where people don't know, especially non-medically trained homeopaths, let's get them to point out, let's get them to find Azerbaijan on a map. Let's get them to find the spleen, right? Like do people know the difference between splenic pain, liver pain, gallbladder pain, pancreatic inflammation? Not going to know this. And so if somebody is doing organ prescribing without anatomical information, and this makes it even more difficult, you've got a mismatch oftentimes between the analytical framework and the way that the data exists. So how do you find the remedies based on that? So for example, in clinic, I'll often say to the students, one of the most important things you need to think about in a case is what is the organ affinity? Some remedies have an affinity for a particular organ system. And so you're not going to choose a remedy that is a bones and joints remedy if the seat of the case is female reproductive issues. Right. So if you're using Burnett materials to solve a Kentian case, you're going to have a mismatch. The same goes with things like, I know you teach the Bernihausen and the TBR2. Even though we love the construction of that, there are limitations, right? Because the number of remedies, or I find that building out a perfect symptom like you would in a Bernihausen style case doesn't always work in complex autoimmunity. So you need a different framework. Or what happens if you have a case, right? You're talking about all the different ways that we analyze a case, forgetting about different teachers and their methodologies like a Sankron or a Schulten or whatever thing, but rather who presents to you, right? So if you have a case that is a physical general's case, or what I sometimes refer to as like a really good repertory case, well, you can build a perfect symptom. You get a constellation of symptoms case. You've got a kid who's got allergies, eczema, and food intolerances and stomach issues, right? That's it. You don't have to synthesize, do anything fancy. You find the specific expression of those symptoms and you're going to find a really good remedy. But if you have someone who has 3 autoimmune diagnoses, they're on 14 different medications, they have all sorts of lifestyle issues, and their symptoms, they're like pervasive. Because one of the things with autoimmunity is that there can be an organ affinity, but there's generally multiple systems involved. And so if you've got an MS case, for example, the location of where the person feels like they've got like a pin going through their 3rd toe on the left foot, it doesn't necessarily matter, right? And so I think going back to where we started again, there are these inherent complexities because homeopathy is not a simplistic modality. You're asked to be like a hyper generalist. We deal with podiatry cases and we deal with psychological cases. You're not going to talk about your feelings to your podiatrist, right? Your podiatrist doesn't care what color your poop is. And the rheumatologist, if you're presenting with neurological symptoms, is going to send you to his buddy. So this idea that we have to be able to back up and look at every case, regardless of how it comes to us, means that we have to have a lot of tools in our toolbox. And I think this is where we've kind of gotten in trouble because the people who really worked hard to oversimplify homeopathy, right? Everybody gets a trophy. Everybody gets to give pills. Yeah. And this sort of mentality of dumbing it down has meant that people have been launched into the profession who don't have the skills to work on cases that are as complex as what are coming to us. And therefore, like we were in that meeting recently, I don't know if actually, I don't think you were there, but this woman said, I practice protocols for complex homeopathy. And I was just like, my head is spinning, but I get it. Because if you haven't been taught 25 different ways to look at a case, then you're going to need to resort to something else. Something that if somebody says you just give a pill for each of the things that somebody is presenting with, then the job becomes so easy. It also doesn't work as well, right? You're laughing. Why are you laughing?
Yeah, because I like the way you
That brings me to, can I do a little sidecar for a second? Because I have notes just from our meeting yesterday, something that we were going to talk about. And then I said, can we talk about case analysis?
Yeah,
But because I think that this is relevant to this point, and it's about education, because that's the book you're working on this summer. And one of the things that we've been talking about as when our board met at our team retreat this summer, we were talking about the fact that we're, as an institution, hamstrung by the lowest common denominator. So if we believe that the students need 25% more than the Achina requirement, so what? But we believe that students need 25% more didactic material than Achina asks, right? And that's based on community standards. You can't blame Achina. That was based on that was community-wide input. And people were fighting to dumb it down even more to minimize the clinical training and all of the requirements. So we're going out, we're saying, okay, in order to practice homeopathy effectively, we believe you need a minimum of 25% more than what the baseline is for accredited education didactically, and at least that much more clinically. We ask our students to do at least 50 days of clinic. They see somewhere between 75 and 100 cases before they graduate, not counting their individual supervision and all the acute work that they do.
Yep.
So if we back this up to case analysis, if the community, right, if the people who are in it for, it's their livelihood and they're saying, no, I want to teach it at this level, or people who want to learn it and they've been told you can learn to do it, but like it takes a lot. And so we're asking people to do this program, right, to do any educational program. There's no agreed upon standard of what it really, really takes to do this job and be successful. So what you've been arguing is it's at a master's level, right? Because I don't have experience in educational taxonomy like you do, but I think of that and it probably means something different to me than it does to you. But what I do understand is that if you dumb it down below, you're not asking for people to engage in critical thinking. Isn't that the difference when you get up to that level? Forget about what you call it, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it means that educational taxonomy, it's just like taxonomy you were saying before with the fish or the plant families or whatever it is. It's a classification that is directly applicable to learning. So if you want to learn a history and you want to learn it at a what would be considered to be a low taxonomical level, is that a word?
Yeah, it's close enough. Go. Yeah.
You would learn dates, right? The Civil War happened on that date, you know, and this person signed that piece of paper on that date. And that is a very sort of basic identification process that's considered low. And it is low because, and that's what's expected at high school, or that's what is expected at primary school or intermediate school or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So
So if you're in a school where you're just learning, these are the keynotes of pulsatilla, or give this remedy when this happens, that's at that
that's
more basic level.
yeah. And so arnica looks like this, boom. And pulsatilla looks like this. If you're taking, let's go to the historical analogy once again. If you're looking at degree level history, then it becomes a process of not just identification or describing something, but the ability to critically think about something.
This is it.
And
Yep.
so, but it's interesting because there's different levels of critical analysis, critical evaluation, and critical analysis, and critical thinking are also considered to be a little different. And so that means that you're looking at the causes of the Civil War. And that means you're looking at the economy of the South, you're looking at the changing population of the North, and you're going, oh, okay, and starting to formulate your own understanding. So it's a process of putting information into a blender and
Yep.
saying, okay, now because of this, but there's a counter argument, and the counter argument is this, but I think it's this.
Yeah.
All right. And so that is considered to be critical or basic critical analysis. And that tends to be at degree level. At master's level, that you take it to a step level, and then obviously PhD level, you take it another step forward. But the ability to critically reflect, critically evaluate, and critically analyze are higher education taxonomical concepts. They are advanced concepts. In other words, now you apply that to homeopathy. It's like, well, when do you give pulsatilla? When do you not give pulsatilla? When,
Yes.
in what circumstances is the totality of symptoms expanded and contracted? When have you got an acute pulsatilla case? When is it a chronic pulsatilla case? And then remember, it's about, but my teacher said this, but I've read in that book there was this. And so that's interesting. And now I'm weighing these two things. There are counter arguments for this and this. This is what I'm going to do. Then you act. And
Yeah.
critical, and the nurses know all about this. Critical reflection is an absolute critical clinical attribute of a skilled nurse, a safe, skilled nurse, the ability to reflect. And the ability to reflect, as demonstrated by some of our students, ain't so flash. It's brilliant with some people, and and less so with others. So it's kind of the example that I would give. You know, you talk about history or talk about geography or whatever it is. This mountain's that high, so what? But how did the mountain get to be that shape? There was this and this, and then you're looking at geological theory and applying theory to a set of facts. And when you've got a set of facts and you then apply your theory, that's homeopathy, right?
See, this is so key. This is where a lot of methodological, categories where people say you do it this way, right? So, for example, if we're talking about the Sankaran idea, which I think had some merit to it, but then it became, well, in order to engage with his system, you had to first choose the kingdom that the person was in. And then it starts getting convoluted, because if you go, oh, that person is such an animal, what does that mean? And one of the things that I teach, because of course, when you're in the classroom all the time, you have to unteach what people are learning because they're listening to webinars and watching things on YouTube. And so people will come in with this kingdom first idea. And so you say, okay, well, look at what are the qualities of this. So you go, okay, well, this, this woman is really competitive and there's a lot of sexuality in the case, and she's jealous, therefore animal. Okay, so what animal would you pick? Lachesis. Okay, so give me a mineral analog to that. Platinum. Give me a plant analog to that. Lilium tigrinum. All of a sudden that theory is cooked, right? So there's no kind of this for that. I'll give another example. Polarity analysis, right? So I love Heiner Fry. I just think he's the sweetest. He's such a lovely person. So he came out with this polarity analysis, and there are people who are loving it because what it's doing is it's taking away a lot of the other possibilities. And what you're looking for, it's looking for, the analytical framework is looking for the tension of opposites in a case, which is great. We do that all the time if there is a tension of opposites in a case. But if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Therefore, you are working from that framework. You may be looking for a polarity in a case for which it is not necessary. If you look at, like I mentioned, a physical generals kind of a case, you've got a kid with allergies, maybe some asthma, some eczema, and, and a food allergy or something. Straight up, just constellation of symptoms, right? Hone in. Go to your materia medica. And what happens sometimes is people will get into this kind of a framework and then they start to overcook a case, right? Or overanalyze a case. And this is what I call the English major phenomenon, right? So, the students will come in and you've got like a simple case of a little kid with like 3 things, it's going to be a calc carb case or a phosphorus case. It's not like you're not looking for some needle in a haystack. And 7 times out of 10, you're going to move that case on your first prescription. But if you start to overcook it because you're looking for the kingdom or you're looking for the polarity or whatever, next thing you know, they're coming up with a thesis statement, right? As opposed to a reflection on a case.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And I think at the end of the day, the point that I want to get across is that it's hard. And you have to be exposed to so many different ways of looking at a case. Because if you're only given one option, then it only works when that one option is presented to you.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting because I've been trying to come up with all the different sort of types of cases, right? So I'm working on this book and I've got this list that is so long. And then I went and I pulled out your method book. So a little plug for Al's book. But the method book, so it's exploring the breadth, context, and application of different clinical approaches in the practice of homeopathy. And I think it's interesting. I think it's a nice survey course of possibility.
It is. Thank you. That's the book that made you really mad, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
But you know why? Can I tell the story?
Sure.
Because I think I take back what I was angry about. I'm doing it publicly. Okay, so the story goes like this. It was, what year did you
11.
publish?
11?
2011.
Yeah.
Okay. So we met when you were researching this book. And so this all started because you asked me about my practice because you were interviewing people about how they practice. And at that time, my practice had a lot of sort of integrative medical support attached to it. This was in the mid 2000s when I would have moved back to Philadelphia in 2006 from Minneapolis. And Minneapolis was like light years ahead of Philadelphia in terms of people's consciousness around their sort of health. And it could just have been the patient population that I was exposed to, whatever. But I got back to Philly and I started to see these clients, and it was a lot of families bringing their kids who were just recently diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And they were desperate to figure out, like, what do I feed my kid? What do I do? I've read that a gluten-free, casein-free diet is going to be helpful. This was before, I think, ABT and all this stuff. So it was like early days, Wild West. And I found that I sort of had to do all this support stuff. Anyway, so when I told you about it, I thought you gave me the stink eye. Yeah, no, the guy behind you. Yeah.
So I've heard you say that before, and
Yeah.
I have a very different memory. And I know what stink eye is, and that's not what it was, because at the end of the day, an integrative approach to homeopathy is exactly what I was doing in my own practice, and relying on other stuff to assist in complex situations. So I hear the story, and
Yeah.
it's definitely not what happened from my point of view.
And this is why I think I have to take it back. So there are two reasons I'm doing a rollback. So the first is that
Hey, if I take back
what exactly. I hear my take back what I said in a previous edition to this work. So I think I was personally defensive
you're on.
because I didn't just like become this way. It had clicked for me that Hahnemann's approach, because I had lived through the crazes as they were and landed solidly back in this is what works. And okay, so I think that when you asked me that question, I was feeling frustrated in that I couldn't actually do my job as a homeopath as well as I needed to, because I could barely get a case out of these people because they were literally desperate for sort of holistic information. Remember, this is 20 years ago.
Yep.
20 years ago. This is pre people Googling everything and TikTok and all the other things. This was brand new. It's not brand new now. Right. Okay. So there was that. And so I think I was frustrated about my ability to do my job. And I felt like, I don't know, I didn't like it as much. I subsequently, when you and I were researching on autoimmunity, the first time that we lectured together in 2017, I think was our first joint lecture. I mean, we've been teaching together, but like we did this joint thing. Anyway, and we did a lot on, no, it was before that. We did it at the jam. Anyway, it doesn't matter when. But the idea though was around like all in autoimmunity, all the lifestyle stuff that is required. And I felt a little, I don't know, personally vindicated isn't the right word, but something like that. Anyway, so that's the first thing I have to take back. The second is so I was given this case taking and case management. And I was on the crosstown bus. And so the school I was teaching for.
Take the crosstown bus.
I was at a faculty meeting. They gave me your 3 books. I didn't have them. And I got on the crosstown bus over Peter Cooper Village, and I had to get to the F train, 6th Avenue, right? And I sit down and I crack open this book, and you started talking about the fact that it was like something about education and that students weren't learning how to do homeopathy very well. And that's when I got worked up.
That's when you missed your stop.
I missed my stop and I ended up at the end of the line. I didn't get off of the subway on 6th Avenue. I looked up and I was at 10th Avenue and I had to come back. And I was fuming. But I now, once again, I get it because I just was looking at it through the lens of my own experience that I was at that time, I was teaching a lot, but I was also supervising a lot. And I felt, yeah, students are learning. How could you say this? But I think now it's becoming evident that.
Can I just weigh on in here?
Yeah.
Because I think what I wrote is homeopathy education is a mess. And I'll stick to that statement, and broadly, there are some great teachers and really good educators and great curriculums and really good schools. However, broadly, it is a mess. And it's a mess because of the taxonomy, and people don't understand it. And the fact that it's about trying to teach students skills and cram a bucket full of knowledge, but also develop character and develop attributes at the same time. And knowledge, skills, and attributes are all learned differently, and they are, depending on the taxonomy, pitched at a different level. So if you've got an allopath or a reductionistic thinker with a set of facts, they're going to go, oh, let's detoxify them and give them 22 nosodes.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's extraordinary because, that's allopathy. That's not homeopathy at all.
100%. Yeah.
And so to develop that muscle, and it's not just the previous reductionistic medical folks that are thinking like that, but this wave of this nosode festival that's going on, protocols and combinations. It's actually, you know what it is? I hate to say this. I think it's about people that have reached their level, their they've hit the top of what they're capable of.
It's the
And-
Peter principle, right? People, they rise to their level of incompetence and then they get promoted. And in homeopathy, they rise to their level of incompetence and then they start giving protocols.
I think so. I actually
Right.
do think so. And because to develop that homeopathic muscle is a higher order.
It is higher order. And this is the thing.
Because there's something about you which is awesome. And that is that you've taught generations of students how to map. That's something which I realized in my own practice I got lazy at. And I got lazy at it, and it often would fall off the part of the process. So, I take a good case, and my analysis would be my repertorization. And without a map in the middle, that's not good practice. And I think there were a couple of lazy years in there for me where I would just listen, repertorize, and prescribe, or, make my decision.
And the map, and for me, because I'm visual, it's really helpful, but I realize as a teaching tool, well, it's a practical tool because at the end of the day, so if you're not familiar with this idea of mapping, a homeopath takes a case and they might have 10 type pages or 20. I use an iPad Pro and I handwrite on my iPad Pro. And I might have, because I'll be writing maybe a little bit bigger on that device, but I might have 25 pages of information. And as I'm analyzing it, it's like you don't know, go from point A to Z and you get to your end point and you might be making connections that you hadn't thought of before.
Yep.
I have a favorite case I was just about to say, but I can't because I teach it and the students need to sort it out. So I'm not going to say it, but you go through a case and when you go through it again, you can start to see in some cases, what is the simple language, for example, which is the simple language. This is, I think, what Sankram, when he was talking about in the sensation method, it's like this idea. Well, he changed it to the other song. I've always called it simple language, and it's the voice of the uncompensated suffering person.
Yep.
And there's the language that we use, and it's really different. Like we talk about this, we go to taxonomically again, right? A low level taxonomy is a student who says, but they use the word control 20 times.
Yes.
And so you know what I've done for that is I said there's no such thing as control anymore. It's been banned from our conversation, right? But when you start to see a case where a person uses the throwaway words, burrowing. We had a case of a woman who needed fungi. She got bovista, and she talked about everything was what was dark and hidden. And then she even talked about, I mean, there were funny things, like you wouldn't prescribe on this, but it's like a confirmatory. She loved, her favorite thing to eat were truffles. It's like, who says that? You know what I mean? I can't remember all the different things, but like at the end of the day, when you deconstructed the case, in her case, or the analogy I often use is take the case as if it's a pot of stew, put it in the refrigerator. The fat that rises to the top is what you're prescribing on. You need to remove that fat layer and understand what's there. The healthy part is what's underneath it. That which rose to the top is what you need to get rid of, and you need to understand it. What that fat is, you might get to it through the simple language, but you might get to it through the polarity. You might get to it through the constellation of symptoms. You might get to it because you understand the miasm. You might get to it because it's screaming a particular remedy, keynotes of the remedy. There are all different ways it comes. And so the thing is, and this is why when you're learning homeopathy, you need to be exposed to so many cases. And the faculty needs to not know what's coming, because how a homeopath solves a problem is what needs to be transmitted to the student. None of this guru stuff. Oh, well, I had a vision of the peppercorns and the goldfish, and it came together in my mind, or whatever. I'm sure a lot of these people can come up with amazing cures, not taking it away from them. But if you're going to teach something, it needs to be reproducible. It has to be. Right? And so this methodical way of looking at cases, that's what you have to do when you're analyzing cases in clinic. But the thing is, there's this point where, and I love when we get cases that are really difficult, because there's this intersection sometimes where an experienced homeopath would say, I know I've seen this before. But a really experienced homeopath will say, I know I've never seen this before. And that tension of not knowing and then getting you to the place where you need to be, that's the magic in case analysis, right? And like sometimes it'll be because it's an obscure remedy. And when we're teaching, for example, it might be like, oh, to the students, you're only going to get so far in analyzing this case on your own. I want you to get from point A to K. And then from K to Z, we're going to do together because I need to show you every single move that you need to make in order to get there. And then inevitably somebody will say, I don't know. I don't know, what am I supposed to do? It's like, that's why you're here. Now you've seen it, right? And that's why you have to see so many cases, because if you're just, oh, I can't even go on.
No, I love it. Well, this is good for me because, I've not really heard what you've been doing. I know that you're out in your office in the early mornings at 5:30 doing something. But no, I understand. So you are also saying that not every case is the same. I suppose this kind of case requires this kind of approach.
Yeah.
This kind of case requires a bit of this. And one of the tools that we just discussed, mapping, is a critical part of it. Have I got that right?
It really is, because there is no, like, this is why when people say, oh, you need a different kind of homeopathy in order to solve these problems, right? So this woman who said she practices complex homeopathy, what she means is she's giving a complex amount of substances for every case. Now, what I'm saying, and this is why I wanted to bring up the educational part of it, because that's foundation level and below. That is very this for that. There isn't critical thinking. There's a menu. It's like if then what? You just do it. But what I'm saying is to really
Sorry, just hold that thought, because there's a legal problem with that as well. If then what? Because that means that the protocol combo prescriber is identifying the named condition
that's right.
and prescribing for it. And so that immediately is closer to practicing medicine without a license than
100%.
that is listening to the constellation of symptoms and is applying similars, which is nothing close to the practice of medicine.
Exactly. And similars is not same. And so isopathy is same. So when they are looking at a case and saying this person either currently has this disease, therefore I give the nosode associated with it, or has had in their past, or has had in their family past, or as it's come now, to prepare you so you don't have it later. It's like, wait, what? It's so far from homeopathy, it's not even funny. And it's fine. Just move far away from us so that when it implodes, I don't really want the reverb. I don't want to catch any strays, put it that way. But this is the thing, Al, because what you've been talking about, and you've helped me to understand this, because like, for example, when a student gets a really good grade, but they don't get 100%, and they say, but I ticked all the boxes, right? Because people want to see that they do it. Well, there are people that they're used to the memorization, the rote memorization and regurgitation of information. What is that, level 4?
Educationally, I think in the American system, it's level 4.
Yeah. And what we're asking people to do is level 6 minimum, right?
Pretty much. Let me just have a quick look at balloon.
Because, well, while you're looking for it, because I think that this is really key. So I want to just like encapsulate this, because we've come through something. We're talking about case analysis, right? The complexities of case analysis. There is no one way to do it. Therefore, the methodologies, you can't say, I follow X methodology or Y. Homeopathy is the assessment of a complex problem, the analysis of that complex problem, and the remedy recommendation is based on a very comprehensive understanding of a multifactorial equation. So if you reduce it to a this for that, or even worse, all of this for all of that, right? That's going from the level of understanding needed and taking it down to a much more simplistic and less effective intervention. Therefore, when people say they are not successful in homeopathy, I wonder if it's because they've only learned to a level 4 instead of a level 6, from which you can go even beyond into understanding.
Yeah. I have a suspicion that's true. That is true. I'm looking at taxonomy right now. There's some images. Any old person can go Bloom's taxonomy and have a look. Bloom, Benjamin Bloom, I think his name was.
Yeah.
Or is that Benjamin Button? I don't know. Hang on.
They're two different people.
They are, but Benjamin, no, Burton Howard Bloom in the 70s. But the taxonomy has changed over a period of time. The diagrams change a little bit, but nevertheless, it's very important from an educational perspective. I love our conversation today. Hey, anything else about case analysis you want to talk about, or do we get to some listener howlers?
Yeah, I think we can. I hope that this point came across, though, about case analysis is, I mean, it's one of the most exciting things, but in order to be successful in Hahnemannian homeopathy, which is really, it's so amazing. I can't imagine why somebody would want to do the cheaper substitute as put forth by, in some cases, a person who didn't understand the basics. And I'm separating that from great thinkers. I have real respect for Rajan Sankaran, for he's got a depth of knowledge, and then he goes from his depth of knowledge and he says, I wonder if I can take this further. No, he's also retracted some of that, and other people have run with it. We're not talking about that, right? But like, there's a difference. Even Jan Schulten, we talked about this before. He was looking for the predictive patterning in the periodic table, and of course, jump the line when it comes to some remedies not having proving and making some assumptions. But at the end of the day, you've got someone who's saying, I'm going to see if I can apply, the map of nature in some way. I think that's interesting. On the other hand, you have people for whom their knowledge of homeopathy, they're saying it can't be done. And I would say, if somebody says you can't do this with classical homeopathy, I would turn it around. That person that you're willing to give money to can't do it. We know that it can be done. Why would you want to learn from someone who says, I've had to find a different way to do it? Take the time and learn to do it the right way. It's like, I mean, it just makes sense to me. And so I think that this is a challenge, because if we want homeopathy to reach its height, if we want to get back into our rightful place in medicine, then we have to stop diluting it, and we have to do the work to get to that place again. The problem we have is we are hamstrung by a community standard, and the community standard is around lowering the bar, lowering the point of entry, all of that. So people who are working like we are at AHE and the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy, between a rock and a hard place, because we're saying, we know, because we conduct research and we measure this, and we have lots of colleagues that are amazingly successful who are working in this way, right? And you've got people who are saying, nope, we're gonna lower the standard. No, you don't have to do all this clinical training. No, you don't, because it's not worth it. You don't have to spend the money. Now, AHE actually, hour for hour of what's provided, is the cheapest of all the accredited schools, and in some cases by a lot. Right? As a not-for-profit, we've got a different mandate for the way that we set our standard. All that being said, what do you do, right? What we have to do is we need to come together, and we need to really talk about this. We need to shine a light on what does it really take to do this job, and encourage people to get to the next level, rather than as a community dumbing it down.
Jesus.
I know. Oh my gosh. Am I this intense all the time?
Not about 9 o'clock at night when you start to wind down and
Okay, good. Because that would be annoying.
the wine kicks in.
All right, let's talk about our listener comments and questions. Okay, first 2 comments. Oh, these are we've got a couple of people who are interested in becoming homeopaths someday, which I love. And this one person, this is in regard to episode 63, the profession of homeopathy, accreditation, and accountability. She says, I'm really glad I came across your podcast early in my homeopathy journey, before I started taking a bunch of remedies and experimenting on my family and friends. I would love to do your program one day. I very much appreciate your integrity and passion.
Nice.
Thanks, Rico. That's really lovely. And someone called Eva writes to us and she says, I'm creating a flyer to educate people about what homeopathy is and is not. On the flyer, I want to state that homeopathy is a system of medicine that treats symptoms. While I believe these statements and quotes are true, are professional homeopaths legally allowed to make these claims? What are the legal ramifications of these statements? Thank you for your insightful and entertaining podcast. It's keeping alive my dream to become a professional homeopath through AHE. Oh my God, I love it. Yeah, this is a great question. I love that you're asking this. And I think it's important how we phrase things so that we don't, get ourselves in a mess. Al, do you want to talk about that? The system of medicine that treats symptoms? Because it's part of a larger statement that actually qualifies.
Yeah, it's interesting because it depends. And the reason that it depends is what jurisdiction are you in? For example, the way in which some regulations and some legislation is interpreted in some parts of the world is different. So if you're in Australia, then it's no problem to talk about you being a practitioner of homeopathic medicine. The interpretation of that in the United States, or in most states in the United States, is very different.
Wait, hang on one sec. Sorry, because what I heard was in the definition of homeopathy. So like to say in the definition of homeopathy, it's a complete system of medicine, as opposed to I'm do you know what I mean? Does that change it?
Yeah, but I'll stick to what I was going to say. It depends on where you are, because there are some places where it would be, for me, it would be unwise to say that if I'm on a website and I'm living in a certain state. And so, just that's really all I was going to say about it. But what I love is that it is, I probably wouldn't use the word treat.
That's what I was thinking, like addresses.
Yeah, but it deals with or manages, manages symptoms. But beyond that, that was a perfect definition.
And so we hope you'll join us for our upcoming open house on Wednesday, June 24th, 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll put the sign up link in the show notes. Also, earlier I was talking about how the integrative medicine idea, and I'm teaching a class on homeopathy and integrative medicine. It's a free class. And I taught the first session on food as medicine last week. And then this week, Tuesday night at 7, and we'll put the link in the show notes for this as well. This week is going to be about movement and body work. And then the next one is on meditation and mindful practices. And then the fourth one is on homeopathy and its role and its place in the landscape of integrative medicine.
Yeah.
We have a couple more comments. I'm not sure that we can go into these questions, but actually I'll bring up one of them real quick. And this is from Craig. This is about episode 119. And he says, provings are fascinating, not fun, but fascinating. My wife has asked me not to do them. I think it is vital for a homeopath to experience one. We are with you, Craig. Al asked me no more. He said to me, no more provings. And
you don't need to do 20.
Now, it's a little, I don't want to say it's addictive. It's not like tattoos, but I think that it's the shamanistic part of homeopathy.
Yeah,
the sickness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you called your proving books the experience of homeopathy.
Experience of medicine. Well, it was a play on words because Hannah called his book The Medicine of Experience.
I know. I love that. It's so good. Anyway, but Craig participated he was a prover for the hippocampus proving, which is interesting because Al also did a proving of hippocampus. No, it would have been the New York one.
Yeah.
And also Musca domestica.
Oh, housefly.
Yeah. Yep. And was also a prover for the School of Homeopathy New York, the Gavia immer, the common loon. And that proving was also done in Minnesota. And he had a lot of nasty mercury symptoms, which is really interesting, Craig, that you bring this up because there's this.
I want to talk about this. What was the comment?
A lot of nasty mercury symptoms. He says provings are no joke and need to be handled professionally.
Oh, I see. I really like that. I think, Hahnemann, he says something really interesting. He says every homeopath should do one. And I agree with that. He says you learn materia medica really well when you do provings, which is also correct. But I'm not so sure that everyone has come out just purely from their chronic health point of view to be able to participate, because some symptoms can be lingering. And you know what? It's up to the principal investigator and the supervisor to say, I'm really sorry. No, you're not
Yep.
going to participate in this one. And I think it's probably that sort of moving boundary of, is this person healthy enough to participate in a drug trial at this time?
And we talked about this before. It's about resilience, isn't it? Because people always ask this question for how do you know if a person's healthy? Like, what is the meaning of health? And before approving, in a good proving, the baseline of the person's symptoms will be understood by their supervisor. I've loved it when I've gotten to be a supervisor for a client of mine who was participating in a proving, or one of the provings I did, I was lucky because the one where I really got sick, my homeopath was my supervisor, which
Yeah.
was good. Anyway, but this idea of resilience, right? If you get knocked down, are you going to come back up is really important. And I think one of the things that people don't talk about enough are ethics in provings. Wait, why are you laughing?
Because I was remembering a residual symptom that happened with me, which is just an old memory. It doesn't matter.
Do I know about this?
I don't think so.
Okay, you'll tell me later. Anyway, but this ethics around provings. So when I was directing a school years ago, I learned from some of the students that one of the faculty members asked them to participate in a proving. And I was like, wait, what? And it was in the springtime. So it would have been before their exams. I mean, when you're leading and proving, participating in proving, whatever, you need to follow all of the human subject research ethical guidelines, one of which is coercion. And so in an undergraduate program,
That one.
that one is big, right? Students being asked to participate in a proving, that is considered to be unethical because there could be perceived coercion. Does it happen safely, happily? Yes. But I think that is something that needs to be talked about. I mean, I'll leave it at that. And a couple of people, we got some real feedback on this one. Someone said, after this is on episode 119 again, after listening to the conversation about provings, I'm realizing how important it is to know where remedy information comes from. For someone newer to homeopathy, which materia medica and repertories would you recommend starting with? And are there any that you'd suggest using with caution? Yes, there are plenty. There are plenty. You know what? If you're just starting out, I would say just, start with the old masters. Get a Kent's repertory and read the introduction and look at the picture of him and his mustache. You learn a lot just from that. And looking at, some of the old what were you going to say, Al?
Yeah, I would start differently myself, but that's fine. I personally, I think start with polarity. I like the therapeutic index, and because in the back it's got the remedy pictures, but then get familiar with the therapeutic pocketbook as well, because I think an earlier introduction to that pocketbook with a little bit of instruction on how to use it as it's intended is really useful. So that's it for the repertories. Denise is right. You can't go past a good Kent or one of the modern versions of it. And then materia medica, is that the question?
Yeah, but starting with Boerke, I love that's actually that's a great idea, isn't it? And Kent's lectures on materia medica.
Yeah.
Right. If you're just learning, I mean, because Kent's lectures on materia medica, it was comprised by his students, like literally from his lectures. And I think what I like about it from an early learning standpoint is it's in lecture format. So it's not just like reading a list of symptoms, but it has a bit of a conversational kind of quality to it so that you can stay awake. Because if you start like reading Boerke at A, and you're going to be like, snoring by the time you get to acetic acid. But if you read Kent's lectures, you kind of get, I think it's a little bit more approachable.
Yeah, he is definitely trying to keep his students awake.
Yeah. So, well,
but
with that,
at the end of the day, you can't go past accessing the provings, because that's where the similars is stored. The second part of homeopathy is in the language of the prover. So access to Allen, access to Hahnemann's chronic diseases and materia medica pura. And then problematically, you really need, that's why the softwares are so useful, because that's where the modern proving data is. But they can get very expensive at the very beginning, unless you're in a school that has access to all of that, to that advanced material.
Yeah, like we have a really beautiful relationship with the folks at Radar Opus. And so all of our students have that access when they're enrolled, which is really nice because I think you kind of want to swim around in it as you're learning. But for just starting out, I think those are some good things. And in terms of the newer provings, you can buy the Dynamis provings one at a time on dynamis.edu. I think you can get to them, and it's it all the proceeds I think go to Homeopathy for Health in Africa, and some of them like have it gives you like a whole learning thing, like, and there could be hundreds of pages, you know. So if you've got like the gallium proving, for example, it will have the, because it's not, you know, it's not going to be found in some of the materia medica compilations now. So you might see the, you know, learn about the substance and about the history and about what gallium was used for in medicine and so on and so forth. That kind of thing is, if you want to get a flavor of something new. And what they do in the beginning of, not all of the Dynamis provings, but a lot of them have this thing that Jeremy does, as if one person. And I love that, like in Ankarigas proving, the salmon proving, just that as if one person. It's like sometimes it tells this beautiful story, going back to case analysis, that in some of the newer remedies where we don't have a ton of physical symptoms, sometimes you get there from that avenue and then you follow up by checking those symptoms. Anyway, all right. And then finally, before we go, we want to shout out one of our HHN student practitioners, Jelza. Got a great testimonial, and Jelza, oh, I love Jelza, and Jelza works in our research office as well. Jelza's got a PhD in
Public health.
In public health. Yeah, that's just awesome. Anyway, quote, we worked with Jelza for an acute consult for my son's cough. She had a great attention to detail, and her assessment of my child's needs was very thorough. Her follow-up was also excellent. She was with us every step of the way. My son improved beautifully. Thank you. And that's from EW. So you can visit homeopathyhelpnow.com to work with one of our practitioners. And once again, you know, we are a not-for-profit. So all of the proceeds go right back into care grants and into paying supervisors and so forth. So it's really lovely feedback loop. There we go. Another one in the can.
This has been a long one. And you know the reason we've got to go?
Because, oh, World Cup, America versus Australia. All right. All right, everyone.
We got to
Lovely
go.
to spend this time with you. Yeah.
This could be painful.
See ya.
See you, folks.
AHE is changing the face of homeopathy education by raising the bar through rigorous academics and unparalleled clinical training delivered live through the soulful use of cutting-edge technology. AHE prepares its students to become fully rounded homeopathic practitioners from anywhere in the world. Apply today at ahe.online.